Part 1: The ordinary world. The air in the city of Kairos was thick with dust and promise. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of the mechanic's shop, casting golden stripes across half-disassembled automatons and half-burnt blueprints. The scent of copper, oil, and singed cloth lingered like a ghost, clinging to everything it touched. Cale Veridon wiped sweat from his brow, smearing black grease across his temple. He barely noticed. The 17-year-old prodigy had been up since dawn, elbow-deep in the torso cavity of an obsolete Guardian automaton. Its gyroscopic core was fried, the filament threads misaligned, and the resonance capacitor was completely missing. Again. "Damn it, Oren," Cale muttered, yanking the screwdriver from his belt. His younger brother had a habit of scavenging without telling anyone, which often left Cale scrambling to finish clients' work. Cale glanced at the ticking brass clock mounted above the workbench. 40 minutes until Lady Tressa arrived to inspect her personal guard unit. The door to the shop creaked open with a sharp chime. A gust of wind kicked up motes of dust that danced in the sunbeams. Oren strode in, wearing a sheepish grin and a leather satchel bulging with parts. "Before you yell, I fixed the capacitor," Oren said, holding up a glowing, humming cylinder. "Improved output by 15%. It hums now." Cale stared at him. "You modified a Class 3 resonance capacitor without telling me?" "Fixed it," Oren insisted, thrusting the part into Cale's hand. "You'll thank me when she pays double." Cale gritted his teeth but said nothing. Oren had a gift for tinkering, one that matched or maybe surpassed Cale's. But his recklessness was a curse. Still, Cale slid the capacitor into the Guardian's core socket, heard the satisfying click of alignment, and stood back as the machine hummed to life. Metallic fingers flexed. Lenses blinked to blue. The Guardian lifted its head. "Function restored." "Awaiting command," it said in a deep, modulated voice. Cale exhaled. Just in time. A shadow fell across the shop's front window. Lady Tressa, clad in flowing crimson robes and surrounded by 2 silent sentries, entered with a flourish. Her gaze scanned the shop with disdain. "You have the unit ready?" she asked. Cale nodded and gestured to the revived Guardian. "Improved reflex response, fully recalibrated targeting algorithms, and a reinforced spine. It'll hold against a ruptured siege beast if needed." Tressa's lip curled. "It had better. The mines are restless again." Her words hung in the air. Everyone in Kairos had heard the whispers. Collapses, strange lights, and disappearances near the old veins. But the council denied everything. As always, she paid in platinum tokens and left without another word. Cale pocketed the money, his thoughts already drifting. The mines. That night, Cale sat on the roof of their apartment above the shop, staring into the foggy horizon where the mountains loomed. Oren joined him with a bundle of dried meat and a bottle of cheap spice rum they weren't old enough to drink. "You heard her," Oren said. "The mines are acting up again." Cale nodded. "I want to know why." Oren snorted. "You always want to know why. Maybe it's just bad luck. Or unstable rock. Or something else," Cale murmured. "We're not supposed to go near the old veins, remember? They say there's a curse. Or maybe old tech buried down there." Cale turned to him. "What if we found it?" Oren froze. "You're not serious." "I am. Cale, the last scavenger crew that went there didn't come back. That's what makes it worth it." They sat in silence. The city hummed below, steam vents releasing pressure, cogwheel trams screeching along rusted tracks, the echo of midnight chimes. The next day, Cale visited the Mechanists' Guild to ask for old maps. The guild master, an aging woman named Evera, looked at him through thick lenses. "You want old veins schematics? They were sealed for a reason. I need to know what's down there." Evera sighed and unlocked a dusty cabinet. "You're too much like your mother. Curiosity will kill you." Cale stiffened. He barely remembered her, just the scent of lavender and metal. She disappeared during a cave-in when Cale was 5. Officially, she died in the mines. But no one ever recovered a body. He took the maps, thanked Evera, and left. That evening, Cale laid the maps out on the workbench. Old tunnels spiderwebbed beneath the city. Markings in red ink indicated collapses. Others were circled, mysterious notations scribbled in his mother's handwriting. Aren leaned over his shoulder. This symbol, he pointed, matches what I saw etched into that old Guardian's core chamber. Weird glyphs. Kale's heart pounded. We leave tomorrow. Before dawn. Their descent into the old veins was anything but glorious. The access shaft near Sector D was barely wide enough for a child. They wore miner suits scavenged from the guild storage room, their helmets rigged with makeshift lamps. It was damp. Cold. The silence felt unnatural. They followed the map, turning where the faded paper instructed. Occasionally, they passed half-collapsed support beams or ancient warning signs scrawled in chalk. One corridor was entirely blocked by rubble, forcing them to take an older, unmarked passage. Then they heard it. A humming. Faint, rhythmic. Like the beat of a heart, but mechanical. Kale motioned for silence. They edged forward, following the sound. The tunnel widened into a cavern, and there, rising from the center, was a spire of glass and metal, half buried in rock. Light pulsed within it. It's still alive, Aren whispered. Kale stepped closer. Symbols etched along the base glowed faintly. The same glyphs as before. He reached out, and the spire reacted. The cavern shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A panel opened at the spire's base, revealing a swirling vortex of light. Kale, what the hell is this? I think it's a gate, Kale said, his voice dry. To where? I don't know. Before Aren could stop him, Kale stepped forward, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. A blast of energy erupted. The world spun, and everything went black. Kale awoke gasping, the scent of ozone in his nostrils. The cavern was gone. The air was different, lighter, humming with static. Above him stretched a sky of swirling blue fire. He wasn't in Kairos anymore. Part 2. The Catalyst. The morning after the storm, David Tran stood at the edge of the crumbling cliff where the coastline had fractured during the night. The sky was bruised with purple streaks, remnants of lightning still echoing faintly in the distant clouds. The sea below churned unnaturally, its color darker than it should be, inky, almost black. Something had changed. Behind him, the small fishing village of Vin Nam was slowly waking up. Fishermen were dragging their damaged boats to shore, their faces drawn and pale. Children clutched their mothers, silent, eyes wide with unease. It wasn't just the storm. It was something else, something older, deeper. David had returned to Vietnam from the U.S. just 3 weeks ago, after his estranged uncle died under mysterious circumstances. As an investigative journalist, he had seen his share of strange events, but nothing like this. His uncle, a historian and folklorist, had been obsessed with ancient legends, particularly one involving a mythical artifact said to grant immense power to those who possessed it. An artifact sealed centuries ago by a secret order to prevent a catastrophic war. Local rumors whispered that the seal had weakened, and that the recent geological tremors were no coincidence. David had dismissed them, until now. His uncle's home, perched on the highest point of the village, was a museum of the arcane. Scrolls, ink-stained maps, faded photographs, and ritual masks adorned every corner. In the study, David found something he hadn't noticed before, a worn leather-bound journal wedged between 2 thick tomes on Vietnamese dynasties. The entries were frantic, disjointed, scribbled in both Vietnamese and broken English. The barrier is failing. The Guardian is gone. They will awaken soon. In the final entry, dated only days before his death, his uncle wrote, "The path opens when the moon bleeds. Trust only the one who cannot lie." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with fire, David followed the coastline trail to the mouth of an ancient cave his uncle had marked on a map. The villagers warned him never to go there. "Spirits wander," they had said. "The sea remembers." With nothing but a flashlight, a camera, and his uncle's journal, David entered the cave. The air inside was cold and wet. The walls pulsed faintly, as if breathing. After several meters, the path widened into a cavern. At its center stood a massive stone structure, half altar, half-seal, engraved with ancient glyphs. In its center was a depression, empty, as if something had once been embedded there. As David approached, the ground trembled. A low hum began to build, coming from deep within the stone. His flashlight flickered. Then, with a sound like splitting rock, a section of the floor collapsed, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into blackness. He knew he should turn back. Instead, he descended. What he found below would shatter every understanding he had of myth and reality. The chamber at the bottom was vast, impossibly large, and at its heart stood a monolithic statue of a creature with serpentine limbs and eyes of obsidian. Before it knelt 6 empty pedestals, each bearing an inscription in a forgotten script. Suddenly, the statue's eyes began to glow. A voice, not heard but felt, reverberated through David's skull. The balance is broken. The heirs must return. Find the keepers before the shadow does. David stumbled backward, gasping, as visions flooded his mind, empires consumed by fire, oceans swallowing cities, skies raining ash. He saw a symbol, a circle with 6 intersecting lines, burn into his memory. He scrambled back up the stairs, his breath ragged. As he emerged from the cave, the moon overhead had turned a sickly red, and from the shadows near the tree line, something watched him. Part 3. The first steps. David's apartment no longer felt like home. The once familiar walls seemed to close in on him, shadows pooling in corners that never held darkness before. He barely slept. Every sound from the hallway, footsteps, the whir of the elevator, the hum of distant voices, sent his pulse racing. The video's contents replayed in his mind endlessly. The glyphs, the whispers, the flickering of the monitor, and worst of all, the final frame, his name carved into that ancient stone, impossibly old yet undeniably present. He spent the first 2 days after the encounter researching the symbols. Books, online forums, obscure historical databases. He scoured everything. He found fragments, echoes of similar glyphs in Sumerian ruins, in obscure religious manuscripts, even in cave paintings discovered beneath ice shelves in Antarctica. But they were never identical, always close, always distorted. As though someone or something had scattered a truth across time, just out of reach. Then, a breakthrough. David discovered an obscure French anthropologist, Professor Lucien Valiant, who had written a single, self-published book decades ago titled The Echoes Beneath Time. The book described universal patterns in ancient sites across the world, symbols etched into rock, buried deep, never visible unless intentionally uncovered. Valiant posited a forgotten pre-civilization responsible for seeding these marks, a culture so advanced, its existence had been violently erased from history. The last known location of Valiant? A village near Catalhook, in southern Turkey. Disappeared in 1993. The pieces clicked. Catalhook. The site in the video. David knew what he had to do. He called in every favor he could. An old college friend, now a logistics officer with a travel security company, helped him get papers fast. Another friend, a language professor, gave him rudimentary Turkish phrases. He sold most of his electronics, including his beloved high-end desktop PC, to finance the trip. When he left, his landlord stood silently in the doorway, watching him though with an expression David couldn't quite place, somewhere between concern and resignation. His flight took him first to Istanbul. The city greeted him with chaotic beauty, minarets piercing the sky, the call to prayer echoing through the narrow streets. But David had no time for wonder. He took a bus southeast, heading inland, where the land grew dustier, more ancient with every mile. Shepherds watched him from rocky hills. Children pointed and laughed when he spoke broken Turkish. The pass pressed in from all sides. He arrived in the village at dusk. A local contact, arranged through a tenuous academic connection, met him at the edge of town. Zainab, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, fluent in English with a demeanor that brooked no nonsense. She led him to a cramped guest house with creaking floors and walls covered in faded tapestries. There, by candlelight, they talked. Zainab had known Valiant. She remembered him as a brilliant but obsessive man who arrived with a dozen crates of books and left with nothing. He had spent months exploring the hills around the dig site, particularly a cave the locals refused to enter. Karanlik age eyes, the dark mouth. No one had seen him after he ventured in. David's blood ran cold. Did he ever mention the symbols? Zeynep nodded slowly. He believed they were not just language, not just communication. He thought they were activators, keys, that when assembled in the right order, they did something. David slept little that night. The next morning, Zeynep took him to the cave. Karanlik age eyes was not grand. It sat halfway up a narrow slope, hidden by scrub and stone. The entrance was jagged, like a torn wound in the earth. David felt it before he saw it, a pressure, like the air itself refused to move. Inside, the light vanished after a few feet. He clicked on his headlamp, the beam flickering against walls covered in soot and time. The silence inside was total. Then he saw them, glyphs, etched into the walls with mathematical precision. David traced them with his fingers, feeling their depth, their unnatural symmetry. He took pictures, notes, voice memos. As he moved deeper, the symbols became more complex, more fluid, shifting from geometric patterns to flowing lines that seemed to pulse when he looked too long. Then he heard it, a whisper, not behind him, not from within the cave. It came from inside him, as though the glyphs were not just carved on stone but etched into his mind. He stumbled back, gasping, nearly dropping his phone. Zeynep caught him at the mouth of the cave. You heard it, didn't you? She said, her voice tight. David nodded. Zeynep looked away. Valiant heard it too. That night, David pored over the photos. He began to see a pattern, certain glyphs repeated, but only in specific sequences. He began sorting them, assembling them like puzzle pieces. It wasn't language. It was logic. A code. But one meant not for machines, but for the human mind. And then he made a mistake. He arranged a sequence. 7 glyphs. He drew them in a circle, the way they appeared in the cave. He spoke aloud the phonetic transcription he'd written beneath them. The air in the room cracked. Every candle extinguished at once. A low tone, like the groan of a mountain, filled the space, vibrating in his bones. The mirror shattered. His laptop screen turned to static. In the shards, for a single second, David saw eyes. Not human. Then it was gone. He sat in darkness for what felt like hours. When Zeynep returned, she said nothing. She relit the candles. She brought him tea. And finally, she whispered, Now you're part of it. David didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Outside, the wind carried voices. And inside, the glyphs waited. Part 4. Allies and enemies. Rain fell in sheets, cascading across the fractured concrete of what had once been a vibrant Tokyo neighborhood. Now, it was a ghostly corridor of broken neon signs and silent facades. Yudo tightened the collar of his coat, glancing at the alleyway behind him as the metallic echo of footsteps dissolved into the downpour. He had not yet learned whom to trust, but he was about to find out. The files Akari had handed him at the end of their frantic escape contained more than names. Inside the flash drive hidden beneath the false bottom of the folder were confidential records of the Aegis Corporation's clandestine experiments. Genetic modifications. Surveillance implants. Failures and successes. One name recurred throughout, Project Kitsune. Yuto knew he couldn't decipher everything alone. The encryption itself was military grade, and while he'd spent years dodging surveillance, cracking top-tier security was another matter. Akari had suggested a name before she disappeared again. Keed. Keed was a ghost in the digital underworld, known only by her handle, Shade Null. A data whisperer. Rumors claimed she could breach any firewall, bypass any trace, and disappear like vapor. Yudo only had one clue to find her, a QR glyph etched into the corner of the decrypted folder. After 2 days of crisscrossing the crumbling networks of Tokyo's underground tech scene, he finally received a cryptic text. Shinjuku Station. Platform 5. Midnight. Come alone. Yuto arrived early. The terminal was dim, the surveillance cameras in that zone mysteriously inactive. A soft hiss accompanied the arrival of an old train, its lights flickering. He stepped aboard. The train didn't move. Instead, a panel near the conductor's cabin slid open. A woman in a hooded jacket stepped through. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're Yuto," she said flatly. "Akari said you'd come?" "Keed?" She nodded once. "Let's get to work." Back in her hidden workshop beneath the bones of a condemned arcade, Keed connected the drive and frowned at the complexity of its protections. But something else worried her more. "You're being tracked." "What?" "I've been careful." "Not careful enough. Someone piggybacked on the data you stole. They know where you've been." Keed launched a countertrace, but the signal scattered into fragmented pings. It was like chasing shadows. Aegis had upgraded. And they weren't just watching. They were preparing to strike. Later that night, Keed introduced Yuto to another of Akari's allies, Hiroto, a former Aegis security specialist who had defected after seeing what they did to test subjects. He had first-hand knowledge of their tactical protocols and knew how to move without leaving a digital footprint. "You're going to need more than tech skills," Hiroto said, handing Yuto a small, palm-sized weapon. "If they come for you, they won't be asking questions." Yuto hesitated. He'd never fired a weapon before. But the look in Hiroto's eyes silenced his objections. Aegis, meanwhile, had not remained idle. Inside their monolithic headquarters, CEO Reina Amari stood before a translucent holoscreen, watching footage of Yuto's movements. Her chief of operations, Colonel Daisuke Maruyama, pointed to the data trail Keed had tried to obscure. "We know where they are." "Do it," Reina said. "No more warnings. Send in the Wraiths." The Wraiths were Aegis's elite retrieval unit, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, and absolutely loyal. By the time Yuto and his allies detected their presence, the first explosion had already ripped through Keed's workshop. The three scattered, Keed disappearing into a side hatch that collapsed behind her. Hiroto dragged Yuto through a service tunnel. Alarms echoed overhead. Smoke choked the passageways. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they triangulate this sector," Hiroto barked. "We go to the docks. I have a contact who can get us out." Outside, rain had returned, a curtain of steel against the night. As they reached the old shipyard, Yuto spotted movement, too smooth to be human. A wraith. "Down!" Gunfire sliced through the air. Hiroto returned fire, his years of combat reflex kicking in. Yuto dragged a cargo crate across the opening, providing makeshift cover. Keed's voice crackled through his calm. "They've jammed signals. I can't guide you out." "We're pinned down," Yuto replied. "We need an exit. There's a freight lift beneath the dry dock. If you can reach it, I'll override the controls." Getting there meant crossing open ground. Hiroto volunteered to distract the wraith. "You run. Don't stop. I'll follow." Yuto sprinted as Hiroto fired flares and ducked behind hulls. The wraith hesitated, then recalibrated. It moved faster than expected. Hiroto's scream was brief. Yuto reached the lift, slamming his hand on the control panel. Keed's override engaged, and the platform descended into darkness. Below, hidden beneath rusted machinery, lay a maintenance corridor leading to the sewer systems. Keed met him there. "Where's Hiroto?" Yuto couldn't speak. His silence said enough. Keed didn't react outwardly, but her eyes hardened. "Then we don't have time to grieve. Aegis will escalate. And we still don't know what Project Kitsune really means." Yuto nodded. "Then let's find out." They vanished into the shadows, but now they weren't alone. Allies had formed. Enemies had declared war. The lines were drawn, and the real battle had just begun. Part 5. Major setback. Rain lashed the rooftops of Hashima like a furious god beating a war drum. The city, already trembling under the weight of fear and hidden power, seemed to recoil with each thunderclap. Kaido stood by the window of the safe house, his eyes narrowed against the distorted street lamps glowing through the curtain of water. He had never felt so cornered. Not even during his worst days on the streets. Behind him, Yuri and Hana argued in hushed but urgent voices. Aya was silent, withdrawn into a shell Kaido couldn't reach. The revelation of her mother's past, and her own connection to Project Shometsu, had fractured something in her. "We can't stay here," Yuri said finally. They found the last base in hours. It's only a matter of time before they track us here. Where do we go? Hannah asked. Her voice cracked. We have nowhere left. Yuri's gaze landed on Kaido. There is one place. The old subway system beneath Sector 9 had been abandoned for decades. It was a haven for the forgotten and the damned. It was also where Kaido had learned to survive. As they moved through the tunnels, the weight of his memories grew heavier with each step. Aya followed without a word, her eyes distant. Yuri led, flashlight sweeping across moldy tiles and rat-chewed cables. But something was wrong. A coldness crept along Kaido's spine. The silence wasn't normal, not for this place. No distant coughing, no scrap of music from scavengers' radios. It was too clean. Too quiet. When the explosion hit, it threw them all off their feet. Debris rained from the ceiling as armed figures descended in a coordinated sweep. The insignia on their gear was unmistakable. The private Black Ops division of Kazama Corp., Unit 88. Kaido pulled Aya behind a broken pillar. He reached for his gun, only to feel a sharp sting in his neck. He stumbled. Darts. Tranquilizers. Yuri roared in defiance, taking down 2 operatives before a net wrapped around him, crackling with electricity. Hannah tried to run. A dart caught her in the leg. She dropped like a stone. Kaido's vision narrowed to a tunnel of shadows. The last thing he saw was Aya being dragged away, her eyes locked on his. Kaido woke to darkness. Pain. His limbs were restrained, metal cuffs biting into his wrists. Somewhere nearby, water dripped steadily, a mocking metronome to his failure. They had taken Aya. He screamed until his voice was raw. Then he stopped. Then he began to plan. In a sterile observation room at Kazama Corp headquarters, Aya sat motionless as Dr. Takeda entered. You have your mother's strength, he said, pulling up a hologram of Project Shometsu. But that's not enough. We need more. We need you to awaken. Aya said nothing. Her eyes burned with quiet hatred. Takeda gestured to the wall. A panel slid open to reveal another girl. Bound. Unconscious. This is Kiri. She's the last survivor of Phase 1. We thought she died 5 years ago. You'll watch what happens to her if you don't cooperate. Aya looked away. Takeda smiled. Meanwhile, Kaido had escaped. He had no idea how long he'd been unconscious. But Yuri and Hannah were alive, barely. They met at an old mechanic's garage, one of their last unburned safe houses. We underestimated them, Yuri admitted, holding his ribs. They planned this, Kaido growled. They knew we'd run. They left a trail. They wanted her. Hannah turned pale. What now? Kaido looked toward the skyline, where Kazama Tower pierced the storm. We break in. You're insane, Yuri said. You'll die. Then I'll die trying. Inside Kazama Tower, Aya was led to a darkened lab where machines pulsed with ominous red light. Takeda watched her with clinical interest. Begin Phase 2. He commanded. A pulse of energy erupted around Aya. Her veins glowed faintly blue. She screamed. Outside, as the storm cleared, Kaido watched the tower from a rooftop 2 blocks away. The odds were impossible. The plan, half-formed. But he knew one thing with clarity. He was not going to lose her again, not without a war. Part 6. Inner growth. Wind howled across the rooftop as Kaido stared down at Kazama Tower. The rain had stopped, but the storm within him raged harder than ever. Every muscle in his body ached. Every breath reminded him of the chaos in the tunnels, and the image of Aya being dragged away haunted his every blink. He could still hear her voice. See the fear in her eyes. We go in tonight, he said, his voice low. Yuri and Hannah exchanged looks. They were patched up, but far from ready. Hannah's limp hadn't fully healed, and Yuri's right arm trembled every time he moved it. We're not ready, Hannah said. We weren't ready the last time either. We can't wait. She doesn't have time. Yuri sighed. Then we do it smart. We don't charge through the front door. We need intel, access, and a distraction big enough to make the tower bleed. For 3 days, they planned. Kaito barely slept, poring over schematics, cross-referencing blueprints with his childhood memories of the Kazama facility. He reached out to an old contact, Ren, a former hacker who now worked underground breaking into corporate AI networks. Ren was reluctant at first. "You're talking about a suicide run," he said over a static-filled transmission. "Kazama's core network is quantum shielded. You need someone inside to break it." Kaito's eyes narrowed. "Then we get someone inside." Aya floated in and out of consciousness. Pain blurred the edges of reality, but somewhere deep inside, something was changing. Each time they pushed her into the machine, more of her latent power stirred. Her mother's memories came to her in flashes: experiments, escape, betrayal, and love. One night she heard a voice in her dreams. It wasn't her own. It wasn't even her mother's. It was deeper, older. "You are the key. You are the weapon. Choose what you fight for." When she woke, something was different. The next time they brought her to the testing chamber, she didn't scream. She focused. The pain turned to energy. Her hands glowed blue. The machines flickered. And Takeda, for the first time, looked afraid. Meanwhile, Rin pulled off the impossible, gaining temporary access to the internal systems. Yuri and Hana moved like ghosts through the supply chain, planting forged IDs and false credentials. Kaito trained relentlessly, pushing his body beyond its limits. He began to remember things his father had taught him, military tactics hidden beneath the haze of childhood trauma. One night, while meditating in the safe house, he experienced a vision. He was underwater, unable to breathe. A figure approached. His mother? She placed her hand on his chest. "You were born to fight this. But not alone." He woke gasping, the mark on his arm glowing faintly. Aya had the same mark. A spiral of energy, passed through generations. It wasn't just a genetic trait. It was a binding force. They launched the infiltration on the eve of the city's annual tech summit, when Kazama Tower was flooded with guests and dignitaries. Kaito and Yuri entered through the substructure, disguised as security contractors. Hana monitored from a van outside, feeding them routes and flagging guards. Inside, Kaito moved like a shadow. Every corner of the tower whispered his name. Every hallway remembered his footsteps. Memories returned, being led through these labs as a child, unaware of what they truly were. They reached the central server room. Ren's virus worked, just barely, giving them 60 seconds of open access. Enough to locate Aya's cell. "Sublevel 9, Hana whispered in their comms. "But there's more. They've accelerated Phase 2. If we don't get her now, they'll move her to the core. Then we end it tonight," Kaito said. Aya stood before the machine once more. Her hands sparked blue fire. She wasn't afraid anymore. Takeda stepped forward. "You've accepted your fate." She shook her head. "No. I've changed it." With a burst of energy, she shattered the restraints. The room plunged into chaos, alarms blaring, lights strobing. Just then, the door burst open. Kaito stormed in, flanked by Yuri. He and Aya locked eyes across the wreckage. "Took you long enough," she said. Kaito grinned. "Nice entrance." They fought their way out together. Takeda tried to stop them, unleashing a new prototype, an augmented enforcer infused with Phase 1 tech. It nearly killed Yuri. But Aya, now fully awakened, stepped between them and unleashed a wave of energy that shorted every system in the room. They escaped into the stormy night, the tower ablaze behind them. Later, safe in a new hideout, Kaito and Aya sat on the rooftop. "You changed," Kaito said. She looked at him. "So did you." "We're not done yet." Aya nodded. Her eyes glowed faintly. "Then let's finish it." Below, the city pulsed with life and secrets. And above them, the stars watched two broken souls grow into something stronger. Together. Part 7. The ultimate confrontation. The city of Hashima lay quiet beneath the haze of dawn, its skyscrapers still silhouetted against a bruised sky. But within Kazama Corp's highest bastion, the core, there was no peace. Only fury, fear, and fire. Kaito led the charge. The breach began before sunrise. Using Ren's final patch into Kazama's defense systems, they bypassed the outer sensors just long enough to rappel onto the rooftop of the core, the fortified command center where Project Shometsu had first begun. Aya, her powers now honed and seething beneath her skin, moved like lightning. Beside her, Kaido was calm but focused, blades and bullets gleaming as the last threads of night unraveled behind them. Yuri, though still wounded, manned their perimeter, while Hana coordinated the final phase from an encrypted relay post. This was it. No fallback. No more hiding. Kazama's inner sanctum was their battlefield. Takeda knew they were coming. He watched their movements through a panoramic interface, flanked by his newest abominations, twisted forms born of forced awakening, experimental soldiers that once were children. Some still bore names. "Let them come," he said, his voice eerily calm. "We'll make legends of their deaths." He turned to Kiri, still restrained, her body trembling with excess energy. "Time to see if you'll serve willingly." Kiri stared back at him, her eyes deadened, but inside something cracked. A memory. A name, Aya. The elevator shaft they entered led straight into hell. Unit 88 awaited them, armored, lethal, soulless. But Kaido was ready. Every move he made was precise. Aya unleashed a wall of force, scattering the first wave of soldiers like leaves in a typhoon. As they fought, memories surged between them, Aya seeing flashes of her mother's escape, Kaido recalling his father's final stand, Yuri in the comms whispering a single mantra: "Don't stop. Don't hesitate." They reached the command center just as Takeda activated the tower's internal lockdown. Walls sealed. Lights dimmed. A siren echoed. And then the floor split. From beneath rose Takeda, flanked by Kiri and two other Phase 1 survivors, corrupted by pain and control. "This was never about survival," Takeda said. "It's evolution. You and your kind, children of failed vision, will be made whole again." He turned to Kiri. "Show them." Kiri attacked. Her power was immense, unstable and raw. I countered her blow for blow, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. As they clashed, Aya whispered between strikes, "You're not his. You're not a weapon. You're a girl. You're free." Something shifted. Kiri hesitated. Takeda screamed and triggered the failsafe. A surge of energy coursed through Kiri and the others. Their bodies twisted, corrupted by unstable energy. Kaido leapt toward the control panel, dodging plasma blasts, while Aya closed the distance between her and Takeda. She felt the mark on her arm flare. The same mark her mother had. The same one now glowing on Kiri. With a cry that shook the core, she released a shockwave of pure energy, not destructive, but resonant. The marks on their bodies responded. Kiri collapsed, sobbing, the control broken. One of the Phase 1s took their own life. The other fled. Takeda stumbled back. "Impossible!" Aya's voice was steel. "No. I choose what I become." And she struck. The impact hurled Takeda into the fusion core. Alarms blared. Systems failed. Power flickered. Yuri's voice broke through. "You have to get out. The tower's going into meltdown." "Go!" Kaito yelled. "I've got her!" They escaped through the lower ducts just as the core exploded, collapsing into itself in a fiery spiral. Days later, in the ruins of Sector 9, survivors whispered of the fall of Kazama. Aya and Kaito sat in the remnants of their old safe house. The city was rebuilding. The war was not over, but the heart of the machine was gone. "It's not about power," Aya said softly. "It's about choice." Kaito nodded. "We made ours." Together, they turned their eyes to the horizon. Beyond it, a new world waited. One they would fight to protect, whatever came next. Part 8. The aftermath. Smoke still curled from the broken bones of Kazama Tower as Hashima's skyline flickered with new light. In the streets below, the once captive city blinked awake, dazed by liberation. The corporate empire that had ruled from the shadows had been decapitated. But peace did not descend like a curtain. It came in pieces, fragile, uncertain, hard-earned, Kaido stared at the smoldering husk of the core from atop a nearby building. Beside him, Aya was silent. Not broken, never that, but changed. Her power was quiet now, not dormant but resting, as if waiting to see what she would ask of it next. "They'll come for us," Uri said behind them. His bandaged arm hung in a sling, and the lines on his face had deepened. "Kazama was just one head of the Hydra." Hana joined them, her steps slower but resolute. "Maybe. But one head gone means the others will hesitate. We've bought time. We have to use it." Aya turned to Kaido. "What now?" He exhaled. "We clean up. We find the survivors. We rebuild. And then, we go after whoever's next." In the weeks that followed, they became something new. Aya helped rescue the remaining Phase 1 subjects, those still sane, those not beyond repair. Kiri, once Takeda's puppet, now stayed close to Aya. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was always a question. "Why did I survive? Why me?" "Because you chose to," Aya would answer. "You broke his control. That matters." The resistance grew bolder. Kazama's facilities across the continent were exposed and dismantled. Files decrypted by Rin showed a sprawling network, other labs, other programs. The truth was staggering. Project Shometsu had been only one layer. There were others still active. Kaido received a message one night, encrypted and signed. A symbol from the past, the spiral mark. Below it, only 4 words. "You are not done." He didn't tell the others. Not yet. One evening, they held a vigil. It wasn't for ceremony. It was for those who hadn't made it: Kaido's father, Aya's mother, the children lost in experiments, the names buried in code and silence. Candles flickered against the wind as the city watched from a distance. Hashima was still afraid. But it was watching. And in that there was hope. Aya stood before the crowd. "We are not weapons," she said, voice steady. "We are not products. We are people. And we are free." The crowd didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. It meant they heard her. Later, as the team returned to their new hideout, an abandoned railway station hidden beneath a decommissioned maglev terminal, Kaido pulled Aya aside. "We're going to be hunted. I know. You could disappear. Live quietly. You've earned it." She shook her head. "And leave others behind? No. You showed me we fight because someone has to. That hasn't changed." He smiled faintly. "We'll need allies." She nodded. "Then let's find them." Far away, in a high-rise untouched by the core's fall, a man watched the city through polarized glass. He was older, dressed in ceremonial black, fingers adorned with rings that bore forgotten emblems. "Initiate Phase 3, he said. A subordinate bowed. "And the girl? Let her believe she's one. For now." The screen before him flickered. Dozens of faces, locations, symbols. At the center, the spiral. The next chapter had already begun, and Aya's war was far from over. Part 9. The Return. The train hummed quietly beneath the ruined city, lights flickering along the length of the tunnel like the heartbeat of a wounded beast. Aya stood at the front of the old maglev car, watching darkness slip past on either side. Behind her, Kiri slept, her head resting against Hana's shoulder. Uri was tweaking a salvage drone, and Kaido sat with his eyes closed, listening. They were going home. Or what was left of it. The message Kaido had received weeks ago wasn't from a stranger. It was from someone long presumed dead, his old mentor Senzu. The spiral symbol had been their mark during the first rebellion, years before Aya's time. It was a call back to the beginning, and it led them not to Hashima, but to Ishikane, the buried city. Aya remembered stories of it, a rebel stronghold that had disappeared after a catastrophic reactor failure, a place lost to time and corporate denial. But the coordinates were precise. The return wasn't just symbolic. It was necessary. underscore 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 underscore. They arrived in silence. Ishikane was a tomb, the remains of a once thriving district sunken into the earth, now choked with vines and steel decay. But it wasn't dead. Deep within, lights still flickered. Energy pulsed beneath cracked foundations. Something lived here. As they made their way through collapsed highways and submerged metro halls, remnants of the old world surfaced, rusted weapons, worn insignias, old recordings playing forgotten songs. Senzu found them first out. He was older, gaunt, with eyes that had seen too much and a voice that cut through time like a blade. You came. Kaido embraced him. For a moment, the war peeled away. Senzu led them into the underground sanctum. The Arca, once a rebel command center, now turned into a shelter for the broken and brilliant. Scientists, refugees, escaped subjects of defunct programs. All waiting. All watching. Aya felt the pressure of expectations rising. Underscore 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 underscore. They learned the truth that night. Project Shometsu had a twin. Project Saikai. Where Shometsu was destruction, Saikai was rebirth. A program meant to replicate awakened abilities not through awakening, but through extraction. A forced inheritance. They weren't just creating weapons. They were manufacturing heirs to power, and it hadn't stopped with Kazama. Saikai was active. Far to the south, near the volcanic spires of Mount Ryujin, a new facility had come online. Worse still, Aya's genetic data had been harvested during her capture. She was now the blueprint. Kiri was the key. Her body still resonated with the disrupted Saikai sequence. If they could map it, control it, they could potentially reverse the process. Or destroy it, but time was running out. Underscore 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 underscore. The decision wasn't unanimous. Some in the Arca wanted to hide, to protect what little they had. Others, younger, looked at Aya like a symbol. A spark. Kaido, watching the debate, finally stood. They're not waiting. Neither should we. Aya stepped forward. We go to Mount Ryujin. We end Saikai. Not with force. With truth. The room went silent. Senzu gave a slow, weary nod. Then it begins again. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, they prepared to move. Uriai distributed the last of their working tech, signal jammers, power cells, camel cloaks. Hana reviewed old routes to Ryujin. Kiri stayed by Aya's side, watching every motion with quiet intensity. Aya packed the spiral medallion Senzu had given her. It had once been her mother's. Now, it would be her compass. As the maglev powered up, ready to take them to the southern edge of the known world, Aya looked back at the ruins of Ishikane. We're not returning to where we were, she said. We're returning to who we were meant to be. The train moved, and with it, the return became a reckoning. A storm was rising at Mount Ryujin, and Aya would meet it head on. Part 10. A new beginning. Mount Ryujin erupted with color as dawn broke, staining the sky with blood-orange fire. The facility at its base, a jagged scar of steel and glass clinging to the volcanic cliffside, was no longer a secret. Not after Aya and her team had breached its outer perimeter the night before. Inside, alarms were silent. Not because they hadn't been triggered, but because there was no one left to hear them. Aya stepped into the heart of Project Psych-I. The corridors were lined with stasis pods, each containing a child, a teenager, or something in between. All suspended in frozen half-life. Screens pulsed with vital signs. Notes lined the walls, scrawled by technicians long since fled or dead. Curie moved beside her, staring at the glass tubes. "This was almost me," she whispered. Aya placed a hand on one pod. "This was us." The confrontation had happened hours earlier. The architect of Psych-I, a man known only as Morita, had waited in the core chamber with his final creation, Subject Omega. A synthetic prodigy, built from Aya's extracted DNA, Curie's disrupted sequence, and traces of Uri's neural command protocols. He was perfect. Too perfect. "Why resist the inevitable?" Morita had said. "You could lead them. Build a world of sovereign minds, elevated beyond pain, doubt, mortality." "You mean slaves?" Aya replied, and then the fight began. Subject Omega moved like a ghost, faster than sound, light bending in his wake. But Aya had grown beyond what they had made her. Not a weapon. A will. The battle raged through collapsing corridors and data vaults. Hannah covered their escape routes. Uri disabled the fail-safe protocols. Kaido took a direct hit shielding Curie, but lived out Aya in the end. It wasn't power that ended Omega. It was choice. Aya reached him, pressed a hand to his chest, and said, "You don't have to be what they made you." For a moment, the flicker in his eyes was enough. He collapsed. Not defeated. Freed. Morita vanished in the chaos. But the war was over. Now, Aya and the team moved through the wreckage not as victors, but as caretakers. They shut down the core reactor. Disabled every stasis lock. Called in the Arca. Evacuation began. Recovery began. Outside, the world was already changing. Across the network, Senzu broadcasted the truth. Every file. Every image. Every name, Kazama. Psych-I. The corporate autocracy that had enslaved generations. Exposed, stripped bare, some fled. Some surrendered. Some fought, and were defeated. But the spiral spread. Weeks passed. The team stayed in Ryujin, turning the ruins into a temporary shelter for liberated subjects. Aya taught. Curie spoke for the first time to a crowd. Hannah coordinated medical relief. Uri trained a new generation in defense, not destruction. Kaido, arms still healing, began building again, a future, piece by piece. One night, under a meteor-laced sky, the group gathered around a fire. "Is this the end?" Hannah asked. Aya shook her head. "It's the beginning." "Of what?" "A world that doesn't fear its own potential. One where power isn't taken, it's chosen." Curie smiled. "Then we choose each other." In the final days of winter, Aya climbed to the summit of Ryujin alone. She scattered the last ashes of the spiral medallion, now broken, into the wind. A symbol, she realized, should never become a chain. She returned not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as herself, free, and so a new beginning.